Today on Mother Mayhem. All of these things are normal reactions to a series of abnormal events in an abnormal childhood. Let me repeat that one more time. Abnormal responses to abnormal events are normal behaviors. Let that sit. Welcome to Mother Mayhem, the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Podcast for daughters. Hi, I'm your host, Heather Gray. I'm a licensed therapist, and I have been helping women navigate the relationships they have with their moms for years. We know they get intense, we know they get messy, and we know they can be complicated. And sometimes they can be abusive. And that's why you're here. We're going to be talking about that intensely personal stuff, so you should probably get to know me a little bit more. It's going to help you decide if this is a show for you and if I'm someone you can trust to guide you on such an important topic. When we dig in, we're going to be talking about childhood trauma. Specifically, we're going to be talking about and tackling directly the idea of maternal child abuse and the impact that it has on daughters. We hear a lot about paternal child abuse, but maternal child abuse, well, it's still an issue that hides in the shadows a lot. I built this show specifically for daughters of narcissistic mothers. It's because I have a private practice where I help women one-on-one with this every day. But these days, my practice is full, and I'm hearing over and over again how women are desperate to talk about this, how not every therapist gets it, and how they need answers, understanding, and a sense of what to do. And that's why you're here. If you've done therapy before, you know that there's some therapists that really bring value to being the container for your story. They like to hold space. They're going to listen, allow you to share your story, and allow you to hear it reflected back so you can make sense of what's happened to you, how you've processed it, and then find a path forward for what you want to do next. There's other therapists, and they're really good at being clinical, and they subscribe to a more, I would say, like specific medical model. They want to educate you about the sides, the effects of trauma on your brain, how your nervous system is affected, and they're going to talk to you about how to calm your body down. They're going to help you with that combination of skill building and process. And me, well, if I'm honest, I've stopped and started recording this podcast and this specific episode several times because I'm neither of those therapists. But this show is so important to me, and the material is so important to me that I really want to get it right. These conversations matter to me, but I'm neither one of those therapists. If I'm going to be honest with you, I can be pretty lousy at holding space sometimes. I can tend to talk too much, and no one's going to hire me anytime soon to be a professor or to teach something of intense clinical content. That's because I kind of see myself as your partner. You're the expert on you. I'm the expert on trauma and on mother-daughter relationships. And if this show is going to work, it's going to work best because we work in tandem together. I'm starting this show, though, with a foundational series of episodes because there's information you need to know. If I'm true blue transparent and true blue honest with you, I do so much better as a Q&A kind of podcast host where you give me the question and I give you the answer. And I can spitball and riff and get to know you and talk, and it would just fly easily out of my mouth. But the reality is that we are talking about something so personal that there's information you need to know and to have in order to really have the conversation. So I have to organize it in such a way that really helps you get it, but also puts us on the same page together. So here's what I think. If I had to bet, up until now, you've been trying to solve your mother wound with a collection of resources. You've probably talked to your own therapist, you've had chats with your girlfriends, there have been the self-help books, other social media therapists have probably gotten in a word or two with you. And I gotta be honest, I like these people, and I loved chatting with therapists, and I love chatting with girlfriends, and all of these things are really important and helpful, and all of them have their place. I am not looking to replace any of them. But when I went looking for who's talking about maternal child abuse or maternal narcissistic abuse, the information I found, it was really scattered and disorganized. It was all over the place. And I know you can learn a lot from these people and these resources, but it is really, really hard to make sense of your mess when it's coming from all these different places. So I have to start with you by outlining the basics and giving you some of the fundamental information you need to better understand what you've been through and how it's impacting you in the present day. So that is like a little bit of a challenge to me, honestly, to be more structured and to make sure I give you the information you need at a pace that your brain can handle and you can handle without it being too much or going too fast. But also, it's really important to me that I give you a frame and a structure so you can start to feel more in control of these things. I could talk and spitball with the best of them about anything, but if I come at you from all sides, you're not going to know, which end is up and where to start for yourself or how to process your own story. So we're starting out with the basics. What does it mean when we say your mom has a personality disorder? And then we're going to get really specific about what a narcissistic personality disorder is, because in this clickbait frenzied world, a lot of people like to call a lot of people narcissists, but we're really only talking about 5% of our population. So not everyone who gets called a narcissist is actually a narcissist. And a lot of people use narcissistic traits when they're backed into a corner, and that doesn't necessarily make them narcissists. But if you have lived it, you know what it looks like, and you know that it's not clickbait worthy, and you know that it is so much more than a social media meme or some, sort of quick, witty comeback that somebody can use. This was a trauma for you, and you didn't know it at the time, but your brain did, and your brain's likely protecting you from taking the brunt of it, even now after all these years have passed. And after working in overdrive to protect you for all those years, your brain is probably wired to constantly be scanning for risks. That might be why you experience yourself as hypervigilant sometimes or overly anxious. And it might mean that your brain is stuck in fight, flight, or freeze. And it's important that you learn how to feel more in control of those things and how to slow your body down and how to get your body to respond differently to those things. And also, if we're really honest here, it is so convenient if I just keep this podcast neat and tidy and talk about your mom and the childhood trauma. But for a lot of you, your mom's not going to have been the worst thing that happened to you or the only thing that happened to you. Life would have happened to you by now. By the time you play this podcast, more life would have found you. And you will have been through some things with your mom in addition to things that life has handed you. So what that means for you is that you might, in addition to dealing with childhood trauma, you might be dealing with something that the psychobabble world calls complex C, PTSD, or childhood trauma. And we have to get really clear with you to help you understand what that is, how it's affected you, and what it looks like in adulthood, because it doesn't always look like what you thought it did. But when you don't understand why you do certain things or why you respond to certain things, you end up thinking the problem is you. We want to get on the same page with the language we're using, how we're talking about this, and how we're helping you make sense of it. Because here's the thing, your relationship with your mom was probably the first one you had. And when it was filled with emotional neglect, abandonment, or abuse, it's going to be really hard to navigate the world as an adult without constantly feeling like there was a rule book that got handed out and you were the only one who missed class that day. And after a childhood of living life by your mom's needs and her desires and her perceptions of you, it's going to be pretty hard to have a relationship with yourself. You're not used to having wants or needs. Never mind knowing what they might be. Knowing what they might be was like vulnerable for you. As soon as you knew you needed something, it would be weaponized in the thing that your mom took away. So with this show, I'm really looking to help you have a better relationship with yourself. Navigating adult relationships is so especially hard and tricky for anybody. But if you have been through early childhood abuse and specifically, your relationship with your mom was at that critical juncture when you were really young and was broken and fragmented, then attachment, intimacy, connection with others likely had its fair share of problems as you were growing up, making friends and learning to date and relate and build relationships with other people. Even as an adult, all these years later, relationships with other people might be the hardest thing for you. I want to use these first episodes to cover these topics because they're so important. I want to create that foundation for you so you can learn and have a greater understanding of what's going on, and you can start to make sense of your mess. I want us all to get on the same page so that when we go deeper, because we really are, if this all goes good and this thing connects with you, then we're really going to go deeper. I want to do that coming from the same place and being on the same page. But going forward, I can't wait until we get past this foundational part, because I really want this podcast to be more than just me talking to you. I'm looking for so much more than a one-way conversation. I am going to be asking to hear from you, and I really want to address the issues that are most important to you. That's why I'm going to be inviting you to share your questions, your concerns, and your experiences with me. Your participation is going to shape the future of this podcast after we're done this limited series of foundational episodes. I'm committed to talking about the things that matter to you most. I can't wait until we get to that part. In my dream world for this show, we're going to build a community of women who are gathering on this topic, trying to find themselves, sort out who they are for themselves, who they are in relationship to other people, how they navigate, how y'all navigate your relationships with your moms going forward, and especially how do you build and strengthen the relationship you have with yourself. And honestly, I can't think of a better thing that I could accomplish or an impact that I could make if I help women come together on this. I'm going to need you to join with me on it, though. That's the only way it works. So hopefully, as you listen and you get to know me a little bit more, that idea resonates with you too, because man, I sure am looking forward to that part. So what are we talking about when we say someone has a personality disorder? We just have to get into it. I'm going to be really honest that this is the part that's a little more scripted than I am used to being, but I really did want to make sure that the information you got is clear, organized, structured, makes sense, and is put in such a way that you can really hear it. So hopefully you'll bear with me with the structure and the script. I'm going to try to sound natural and authentic too, because I want you to get to know me, and you're not going to get to know me very well if I just keep reading at you. But again, I want to make sense of your mess. And the way we do that is getting each other on the same page. So here goes nothing. When we talk about personality disorder, what we're talking about isn't like depression or anxiety. If you have struggled with depression or anxiety, you know that it's a little bit, in the psychobabble world, we call it episodic. It has a start, it has a middle, and it has an end. Some people will have experienced anxiety for years and years, or depression for years and years, but it shifts and moves and changes shape. Personality disorders aren't episodic. They don't have like a beginning time or an end time. They're a pervasive way a person moves through the world and looks at the world. And the way I sort of have helped people understand it is that it's a mental health condition that affects how people think, feel, and they end up acting in ways that are different than what other people would consider normal. It makes it really hard for them to navigate life in the day-to-day. They really kind of can't do relationships. They'll struggle with work, and they'll really struggle with handling day-to-day life. When I talk about it in my practice, I really talk about, people who have a personality disorder, because, there's more personality disorders than narcissistic personality. I'm just going to keep it clear and clean as I can for the sake of structure, and only talk about narcissistic personality disorder. But there's others. But specifically, when I talk about personality disorders and try to help people understand it, I talk about it in such a way that explains for people that someone who struggles with a personality disorder, they can't do relationships. Their world, in their perception of their world rather, is kind of fragmented and broken. They don't see things the way we see things. So then when they interact with us and have relationships with us, they're interacting with us from that broken and fragmented place, which often quickly causes conflict, confusion, tension, and uncertainty for the people who are participating in those relationships. Now, if we're going to be talking about narcissistic personality disorder and getting really clear about what that means, then we're going to dig in just a little bit deeper. If we're saying that your mom has a personality disorder and specifically has narcissistic personality disorder, what we're saying is she has an exaggerated sense of self-importance, a need for admiration, and that she can often come across as self-centered and entitled. And as I say that, I can almost hear you all like sort of yelling back and being like, wait, there's more, because there's always more when it comes to narcissists. She has difficulty empathizing with you. She has difficulty accepting criticism. It's like she sees herself as the center of the universe, but even that sometimes seems a little dramatic and, sort of over the top in an explanation. More likely, your mom moves through the world where she sees herself at the very least as the center and the be all and end all of your family, and everything going on around her revolves around her. While this isn't going to be true for all narcissists, if I'm going to be really honest with you, I think a lot of narcissists get an especially bad rap because people forget this other part. And this other part is that, remember what I said about personality disorder. People are looking through the world from a broken and fragmented lens. My experience with narcissists and people who are sort of up close and personal to narcissists is oftentimes they are the most insecure people on the planet. Their view of themselves and what they think themselves to be capable of, what they think they're worthy of and deserving of, is actually the exact opposite of how they portray themselves. And the reason why I bring this up is because it speaks to the motivation of all of the maddening behaviors they often choose. Because, at the core, the narcissist's biggest fear, your mom's biggest fear come to life, was that people would find out her dirty little secret, that she didn't, she wasn't really all that, or she wasn't all that good. Any sort of story she had about herself, her biggest fear was that that was going to come out. And so she crafts this careful image of herself, and then she works and manipulates people and situations so that whatever the situation is around her, it reflects that narrative. That's why people outside the house might have adored your mom and had no idea that she was so manipulative behind the scenes, because she worked so hard to craft that narrative that works for her, and then everything else stayed behind closed doors. But let's sit with that for a second, because what I just said is actually really super important. So she works to craft a narrative that works for her, and then everything changes behind closed doors. So what that means for you is that she can seem like 2 or 3 or 4 different kind of people, depending on what the situation called for, or on depending on who you were talking to. It wasn't your imagination. If you experienced her that way, it wasn't your imagination. That's really important for you to hold on to. Because here's the thing, as a daughter of a narcissistic mother, this is the part that you're all too intimately familiar with. Your mom manipulated situations to get special treatment. You might think of your mom and you might think of how often she put everyone around her down. And we know that included you. We know too, she wouldn't have been able to tolerate any kind of criticism. She wasn't able to empathize, and she could only respond to the world around her as she was perceiving it. Because here's the thing, narcissistic mothers, they come in all shapes, sizes, and patterns and ways of moving through the world. But ultimately, what it looked like for you as a kid and how you might be experiencing it now as an adult, there's a lot of universal experience in that story. First, the first thing that comes to mind when people are talking about this is often narcissistic moms are seen as critical and demanding. They may have your mom may have constantly criticized you or just kind of been sporadic about it, but they often belittle their daughters as a way of making them feel inadequate and unworthy. They're not always it's not always constant. And you might have found it on a Monday she liked you and on a Wednesday she didn't, but you know that the thread in your childhood was one of being critical and demanding. You likely experienced her as emotionally manipulated, sort of emotionally manipulative. Narcissistic moms use their emotional manipulation to control their daughters as a way of getting their own needs met. So, an example could be If your mom was, insecure about you having other friends, she might suddenly start putting down one of the friends that you mention a little bit more often because, oh, you're going to see Audrey today? Oh, did you know? I don't know if you know this, but just the other day, I was hearing about Audrey and I heard ABC XYZ, something that would make Audrey a little less attractive to you. So maybe you would want to stay home with her more, or that you wouldn't lean into Audrey's influence and she would be able to maintain, the control that she needed to have over you in order to feel safe and secure. You largely probably experienced your mom is really self-centered and lacking empathy. They're often more concerned with validating their own needs, their own desires, and that means that they become largely incapable of empathizing with anything that you might need or what you might be experiencing. One of the things that, sort of sticks out as that sore thumb when you hear this characteristic, you go, oh, your mom may be a narcissist. It's if she was jealous or competitive. Narcissistic moms, it's not uncommon for them to get jealous of their daughter's accomplishments. And you might have experienced your mom as competing for attention or admiration so that if you won the soccer meet, suddenly your mom's talking about something she did in order to help you be at that soccer meet. Like, oh, she never would have scored those 2 goals if I hadn't been bringing her to every practice or if I hadn't gotten up early on that Saturday to get her to the field on time. There's this sense that your achievements can't exist, just on their own as your achievements. She will link herself to them and sort of imply that your achievements were only possible because of her involvement with them. You might have also experienced your mom, as using you for validation. So narcissistic moms have this thing where they sort of view their daughters as extensions of themselves. So if you're looking especially good or you're looking, if you're dressed really well or well behaved, you're going to go out and impress somebody, as a kid. Narcissistic moms like to dress their kids up a lot. And that's something that I hear is a common thread. But it'll be like, oh, I picked out this dress, or I just did this hair ribbon, or I did this. That they use you to feel good about themselves. And when they weren't doing that, they were likely creating an environment in the house where you and everyone living around her probably felt like you were all walking on eggshells, where if it didn't go right, if the dress wasn't perfect, if the hair ribbon wasn't perfect, or if, you didn't do XYZ, suddenly there would be tension. Suddenly there would be emotional detachment or belittling or criticism. So not knowing what the right answer was, not knowing how perfect you needed to be, or, depending on the way the wind blows, how you needed to show up on that particular day. You're probably really used to the idea that having a narcissistic mom meant that you were often walking on eggshells. If you're the daughter of a narcissistic mom, you're also going to know and be all too familiar with the idea that your needs and your feelings were often ignored or dismissed or entirely invalidated. This likely for you sort of created this cycle of always needing her validation or approval until that moment where you kind of realize it's not worth it. So you stop and you numb out and you tune out. And if it were a therapeutically perfect world, you internalize that as, oh, I'm never going to be able to please my mom. My mom's never going to let me win. That doesn't mean I'm not worthy of love and acceptance. But you're a kid and your brain has no ability all on its own to process your mom's rejection and her dismissal of you in that picture perfect, clean, therapeutic way. Odds are it created a cycle for you of perfectionism, of always trying to be enough, of thinking that you had to perform in order to be seen or recognized, and that even if you performed and you did your best, you were never going to be good enough. That's more often than not the way kids, when they're really young and they have no idea why their mom's talking to them that way, that's a lot of time the story, the story that women told themselves as they were growing up when they were little girls. And I think it's entirely too convenient too if we just sort of paint this picture of the narcissist as somebody who, constantly put you down, and was constantly mean and the devil. A lot of times I talk to women and they talk about their moms, and there is love and there is respect there about some things, or there's admiration. but it's not all bad feelings about their mom. And that's a lot of times because their moms weren't always all that bad. Usually, that was part of the game and part of the mechanism because, people who move through the world with these narcissistic patterns and ways of moving through the world, they know that if they constantly act like the devil, if they constantly act in this monstrous way, that like somebody's going to call them out. So instead, sometimes they play it off with charm. They'll love you one day and then criticize you the next. They'll sort of compliment you and then they'll put you down. But it will always create an environment where you don't know where you stand because some days you were the angel and some days you were the best thing that ever happened to them. And some days you're the reason none of their dreams came true. So you could find yourself with your mom being the angel sometimes and the devil other times. And man, if you had siblings, you might recognize that like there was one of you in the family that was like the golden child and could never do anything wrong. Or then there was like the scapegoat who was always the family hot mess, who was always the one getting in trouble. And narcissistic parents and particularly mothers have this way of pitting their kids against one another. And it's because they become like these puppeteers where they're trying to get their kids to dance for them and perform and, meet whatever need that they might have in the moment. And, the reach of narcissistic motherhood is big. One of the other telltale signs of, sort of being raised by a narcissistic mom is that not only was there this tension between you and your siblings and other people in your immediate family, but a lot of times you can recognize that you were raised by a narcissistic parent when the trauma, drama, and the conflict and the sort of disconnect also exists in extended family. A lot of the women that I see in my practice, they didn't really have relationships with aunts and uncles or grandparents because they'd already sort of been combusted and disrupted by their moms. And so it creates this isolated echo chamber where the only people in the family are the people in the home. So it can sometimes also create this really small, isolated, lonely way of moving through the world because it not only decreases the amount of people around, but it also decreases the amount of support. It might feel impossible for you to trust yourself, never mind trusting other people and relationships. It is just a big deal, and there's no part of your life that your mom hasn't in some way impacted because that's what early childhood relationships do. And when they get fragmented and broken or impaired by trauma and abuse, it gets in the way of you identifying and having a healthy relationship with yourself or with other people. So you might find yourself in the present day coming here because you can't get out of the people-pleasing behavior. You might be struggling with perfectionism or, about having a difficult time expressing emotions because you don't always know how you feel. And relationships are so hard. Without healthy attachment in the beginning, every other relationship in your life you might experience as difficult or upsetting or tiring or really just in general hard to navigate. You might be coming here because you're having a difficult time asserting yourself or managing, sort of taking up space without feeling any guilt. And, the other thing too is that you're navigating all of this, probably most of you still trying to figure out what kind of relationship to have with your mom in the present day. Some of you may have found me already, getting to this point where it's like graduate level school boundary setting and you've gotten to the point where you've established no contact. But most of you are at this point where you're still navigating your whole thing. You're trying to understand it for yourself, navigate the relationship you have with your mom, navigate the relationship you want to have with your mom now that, these lights are starting to go off and you're starting to have better understanding. So it's going to be really hard for you to understand your sense of responsibility or obligation and make sense of that. And we're going to be talking about that in the coming episodes. How do you navigate that? How do you find your way with it? Because you're coming here probably with some sort of fractured sense of self. Maybe you have put some of the pieces together, but not all the pieces together. But it can be really hard for you to figure things out. And when you've had an emotionally limited mother, of course it's hard to figure it out. You can't figure yourself out. You haven't learned how to take up space. You haven't learned how to have relationships with other people. And it can really, really impact you. You might be managing flashbacks. You might find yourself struggling with being avoidant or constantly scanning and hypervigilance. You might have these negative self-talk tapes that keep playing no matter, and usually they play loudly and usually they play, on repeat, and you have no idea how to slow down the tape or how to get a different tape to play instead. A lot of the women who find me, they're finding me because their lifetime of childhood upset and disruption has led to their own, mood struggles with depression and anxiety, because trauma does that to the body. It depresses the system. It creates like a fuel inside the system where, girls who have been raised by these narcissistic parents, like you might feel like you're fueled on anxiety. It's going to affect you physically. It's going to affect you emotionally. It can even affect, for crying out loud, it can even affect the way you sleep. It affects all of this. And all of, if we look at all of the ways you may be affected, all of these things from sleeping, sleep disturbances, mood disturbances, all of this, if I can make anything clear to you, anything at all, I want to slow down my rant and I want to slow down my roll here for a second. I do tend to go on with things, so thank you for bearing with me. But all of these things are normal reactions to a series of abnormal events in an abnormal childhood. Let me repeat that one more time. Abnormal responses to abnormal events are normal behaviors. Let that sit. It may not be working for you right now. Those dysfunctional behaviors, those things might be getting in the way of who you want to be, how you want to move through the world, and the relationships you want to have. But at some point, those behaviors, they've kept you safe. And in talking about this together over the next couple of months, see, I'm wrapping up now. Aren't you glad? My hope is that you're going to come to appreciate yourself for getting through. You're going to have your own back a little bit more, and you're going to learn new ways of being and moving through the world. That's why we're here, guys. That's why I'm talking to you, getting on the mic, and offering you this series. So if you've gotten this far, and if this sounds like something you need in your life, I really hope you're going to join me for the next episode. I'm going to walk you through the childhood trauma. We're going to go deeper into what that is, what that means, how it's likely impacting you as an adult, and we're going to teach your body how to calm the fuck down when it's running the show, because that is what it feels like. Your body probably feels like it's on fire from time to time because it's constantly been wired for fight, flight, or freeze, and we're going to get you more in control of it. We're going to get you in control of all of the things that happen next for you. Thanks so much for joining me here on my first episode. I know it's probably a little bit wobbly and I was probably, a little bit gone on too long, but I really, really am so very glad that you're here and with me. Thank you so much for joining me. Our first episode of Mother Mayhem is officially in the books. I'm so glad you found it. I'd really love to know what you think. If you have a comment or a question, please do send it my way. You can find me over at heather@daughtersnpd.com. You're welcome to attach a voice memo with your comments or questions, things you'd like me to talk about in the future. And as you begin to know and trust me more, I really hope you're going to write in with stories, experiences, and questions. My dream for this show truly is that it's more about you than me. I want us to partner together and make this an advice show where you're the expert on you, and I offer you the information you need on trauma and recovery. Together, guys, I really think we can build a community of daughters joining together to recover from narcissistic abuse. That's why I'm here. I really appreciate you tuning in. Special thanks to Emmanuel. He's going to be tackling the editing of this show. Good luck with that, dude. I sure talk a lot. If you've enjoyed this episode, please, please, please subscribe to the show. Leave a review over on Apple or on Spotify or on your favorite podcast app. If you know another woman who needs this conversation in her life, please do share it with her. Your feedback, your comments, anything you have to say is going to help me build the show and make it better. I really do want to hear from you. You can find me again on Instagram as well, DaughtersNPD. Until next time, take care of you. Know that I'm in it with you. Thanks for listening to this first episode of Mother Mayhem. Bye for now.